The new Death Stranding trailer may have left you more confused than you were before about the upcoming Kojima Productions game, but there are actually a lot of interesting details to dig into. Some shed more light on the state of the world Hideo Kojima has created, while others may hint at possible gameplay elements. Let's take a look. The first thing we see is a patch of vegetation rapidly growing and dying as Norman Reedus' character, who we later learn is named Sam, explains the course of the universe.
And then came the next explosion.
He mentions an explosion which gave birth to time, space, and life as we know it, an obvious reference to the scientific Big Bang Theory. Later in the trailer, he mentions the next explosion, a quote, explosion that will be our last. This feels like a reference to nuclear war, a subject that is not out of place in Kojima's work, but it also brings to mind Neon Genesis Evangelion and Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. Both works share a lot in common with what we know about Death Stranding so far, the focus on worlds existing in the wake of some global cataclysm and environmental disaster. Angels in the Evangelion universe and the atomic god warriors from Nausicaa are also extremely reminiscent of the massive humanoid entity revealed in this Death Stranding trailer, but we're getting ahead of ourselves now. Sam and two unnamed men awaken from an accident, injured and bloodied. Sam's jumpsuit reads Porter, which may be the name of an organization or the name of his role, perhaps as a transporter of some kind. The armbands on these two guys read Corpse Disposal Team 6, which may explain what they're doing with the yellow skull-faced corpse. We know from the previous Death Stranding trailer that someone or something is capable of reanimating corpses and that humans have borrowed this technology, but for what purpose is still unclear. By the way, Kojima totally played this scene out with the Yellow Submarine Lego set earlier this year. So as this guy struggles to get his buddy out from under the overturned vehicle, three things happen that give us a few indications of what we can expect from gameplay. The robot on his back alerts them to a hostile presence. The guy under the truck starts to age rapidly for an unknown reason, and we get a good look at these devices on their wrists, which appear to act as health meters. We get pretty good confirmation of this once this guy attempts to stab himself to death later, and this meter goes from blue to yellow to red. Will we see the DualShock 4 light bar come into play somehow? It's hard to tell, but this may also be similar to the handcuff device we see on Guillermo del Toro and Norman Reedus' characters in previous trailers. The robot is clearly capable of detecting and alerting its user to the oil creatures we've seen before, which could hint at possible stealth elements. But what's interesting about this is when we realize it isn't the robot that's sensing nearby enemies, it's the baby. We see the robot deactivate once this character abandons the baby in the incubator, and Sam's powers up once he's in possession of the child. We saw some level of clairvoyance from the baby in the last trailer with Del Toro. The nature of what is actually being detected is the bigger mystery. The idea of an invisible creature is probably too simple. The entity or entities leaving handprints here and in the first teaser seem to be reaching through from a parallel dimension, with the oil-like substance allowing them to actually break through. We see it when the baby in the first teaser seems to disappear, and we see it in this trailer when the puddle of oil, seemingly controlled by one of these floating figures, attempts to steal the injured character. Whatever these creatures want, they want people alive. They immediately abandon him once his partner shoots him in the head. At this point, this hooded figure shows up. The shushing and pointing gesture they do is nearly identical to what Mads Mikkelsen's character does in the last trailer, which leads me to believe they're the same person. His outfit looks very similar to Chico's unused concept art from The Phantom Pain, and he seems to have a more advanced version of that robot detector as well as his own incubator. Once the oil creatures come for this guy, we see him pass the baby onto Sam and tell him to run before trying to kill himself. What's curious about this scene is the way everything except Sam begins to float away. At the climax of the trailer, Sam comes face to face with a massive hand-headed creature that may or may not be the same floating figures we've seen before. From its hands, we see these huge marionette-like wires, and from its torso, a huge umbilical cord. Whatever it does to the corpse disposal worker causes a massive explosion that seems to push Sam out of that reality and into another. The idea of nuclear war or some other catastrophe causing a tear in our reality is one seen in a lot of popular fiction. See Twin Peaks: The Return for a recent example. Underwater, we see Sam has a tattoo on his right arm. It appears to be a devil tattoo that Norman Reedus apparently has in real life. A mark briefly appears on his chest and disappears. Around him, everything is inverted. Things float slowly to the surface, this horrible thing appears to swim above the water, and all the creatures swim upside down. Here we get another good look at that Bridges United Cities of America logo. Again, it's a map of the US with an ominous gap around Washington, D.C. The dreamcatcher we saw on Sam's back earlier floats by too, as well as these little bugs that resemble large tardigrades. Inside what is apparently a second Sam at the bottom of the ocean, we see not only a baby, but handprints too. The C-section scars from the first teaser imply that what we're seeing here takes place before the child is eventually removed from him. One popular theory so far suggests the babies are clones of their owners, which could suggest mechanics involving constant death and rebirth through clones of the player character. After the underwater sequence, Sam wakes up on the surface and coughs up those tardigrades we saw earlier, proof that it wasn't just a dream. He still has the incubator from earlier too. Hanging from it, we see what looks like a little keychain of Kojima Productions mascot Ludens. Sam sheds a single tear, and just like in the first teaser, we get a wide shot of those 5 floating figures from earlier. Despite Sam talking about explosions here again, the massive crater in the middle doesn't look like it was created by a blast. Those lines of sedimentary rock and erosion make it seem more like a drained lake. Whatever hostile force has taken hold of Earth is clearly doing irreparable damage to the planet's aquatic life, bringing us back to the very first thing we saw in its debut. It will probably be a long time before we get a good look at Death Stranding's gameplay, but the themes explored in each of its teasers and some of the clear homages to other popular works of fiction give us plenty to think about until the next big reveal. If you liked this video, be sure to check out the full Death Stranding trailer from the 2017 Game Awards. Don't forget to also check out our analysis of last year's Game Awards trailer. And for everything else, keep it right here on IGN.